let's start session 5 about active and passive address scanning. So the first talk will be given by Genevieve Bartlett from the University of South California, the Information Sciences Institute. It's a joint work with Jelena Milkovic, John Eidemann, Ao Shi, and Xiyue Deng. So Genevieve is a computer scientist at the Information Sciences Institute, and she's interested in traffic modeling, DDoS defense, and behavioral authentication.
Thank you. So I'm here to present our paper called Do You See Me Now? Sparsity in Passive Observation of Address Liveness. So I'm going to break that title down because we all use slightly different terms, and if you're not familiar with the area, this can kind of look like, alphabet soup. So by sparsity, we mean factors that limit your visibility, okay? But visibility into what? Visibility of individual addresses, IP addresses, or visibility of /24 blocks networks. And by liveness, we mean are these in use and visible from the public internet? And can we see them with passive observation? Meaning we're not sending out active probes and interpreting the results. We're just observing and seeing if there's any communication from these IPs and counting them as active when there is. So there's a lot of work that's been done in exploration of liveness, and there are a lot of people actually at TMA that have contributed to this work. So all prior works here that I'm listing are talking about the macroscopic view of IP liveness, meaning they're trying to count and get an estimate for the entirety of the internet how many IPv4 addresses are in use. So originally this was done with active probing, and that's great. You don't need a great viewpoint. You just send out this traffic, and you send out these probes, and you interpret the results from them. There is some problems, though, because there are some hosted networks that will filter those probes, and so it's hard to know whether those filtered probes mean that that IP address is not live, or whether your probe just got filtered. So there's another complementary method, passive observation, where you can learn about hosts that don't respond to probes by watching and observing traffic. Again, if you observe traffic from an IP and you know it's not spoofed, then you can count that IP as live. But there's some problems here, not only with the spoofing, but you may miss hosts that aren't active very often because you can't watch forever. And there's no such thing as a perfect viewpoint. We don't have the ability to sit there at all different points around the internet and observe traffic everywhere. There's been a lot of work in combining these two methods, which is great because they're complementary. It's still not clear, though, when you combine these methods, exactly what you're missing in your measurement. And there's been good work with combining active and passive plus statistical methods, such as capture-recapture, which is a great way of estimating how much a group of sources, whether you're using active or passive or both, together may miss. But that still doesn't tell you what sources miss and why, like which specific sources miss which specific address and why they did not see that address. And it's still not clear if after I combine 2, 3, 4, 5 sources, whether I can actually say this is enough. This is going to give us as complete a picture as we're going to get with any other grouping of sources. So that's where our work comes in. Well, the work previous is macroscopic, looking at these broad strokes as counts across the internet. Our work is microscopic. So we're trying to understand the systematic biases within sources, but from this microscopic view, so we can understand exactly what sources miss what and why. So while a source may have great macroscopic visibility in the internet, they may not actually be great microscopically, especially for certain populations, meaning that we are systematically biased in certain sources. And so this work is here to explore what those biases may be. And that helps us explore the choices for what sources you might use if you're in the lucky position of having choices of sources, or understand what sources you should combine or pick, or what your sources may be missing if those are the ones that you have. So for our sources in this work, we have 5 passive sources, which is 3 different university sites. That's 3/16s and 2/21s. We have a popular CDN that we have 2 different types of logs from. One at some pops with a longer time period, and one over a longer time period with across 30 pops worldwide. For completeness, we've added some active probing from Trinocular. We have the same time period for all these data sets, so we're roughly covering the same week. So we would want to watch longer and have a longer data set if we were doing macroscopic work, if we were trying to do more of an estimation and say this is the number of IPv4 addresses used. But that's not the point of our work, although we do use the joint just to say that roughly we do see about the same as other data sets. We do see roughly the same block number of /24 blocks and the same number of addresses. But the main point here again is that we're studying this microscopic biases within sources. And what we want then is a diverse set of sources, which we have with these edge networks that are client heavy from the universities, and with CDN, which is this distributed servers across the internet. So for today's talk, I'm going to cover two of our methodologies for sort of exploring this microscopic view of biases, and have like 3 results from each of these that we can pull out some recommendations from. So I'll start with this methodology. We have this regular analysis and inverted analysis, and I'm sure you'll recognize regular analysis. So in regular analysis, we have some network that we have the ability to place a monitor at the gateway. All right, so we place monitor R at K. So we're watching all traffic going in and out of K to the rest of the internet. So as this goes, right, we learn something about the rest of the internet. Right? So if we were using passive observation for a macroscopic view, how many IPs are out there, we'd be using these connections to sort of count what live IPs there are in network B and network M over here. Also, while we're doing this, we have a lot of information that we learn about K, the network that we've got this monitor on. And in our work, we consider this near ground truth of what IPs are active in network K, because we're watching all communication to and from these IPs in this network. So inverse analysis is taking this and not asking what we know of K or what we know of the rest of the world, but what the rest of the world knows of K. So with inverted analysis, we place virtual monitors at all these places that K communicates with. So here we've placed virtual monitor V1 in front of the B network and virtual monitor V2 in front of the M network. And then from there, we can understand what, if we had actual sources from these points, what they would know about the K network, what they would see and what they would miss. So for example, V1 has this viewpoint of what the K network looks like, and V2 has a different view of what the K network looks like. So neither one has a complete visibility into the K network. So we use this inverted analysis, and I'll give you 2 results from this. First, that visibility is heavy-tailed and bipartite, and second, that popular servers see a lot, but that's not everything. Having a popular server that has popular content doesn't mean you're going to see clients everywhere. So first, I'll show you that visibility is bipartite and heavy-tailed. So this graph here, this is the fraction of ground truth. So in our K network, which is our corner universities, our edge networks, this is the fraction of ground truth, and it's logarithmic scale here, and it's fraction of ANS monitors that see that fraction of our ground truth in our network. So again, it's log scale on both sides. And there's 3 lines here, each representing the 3 edge networks, the 3 universities we have traffic from. And from here you can see that only a very small fractions of organizations out there actually have visibility into these edge networks that we have data for. So only about 0.5% of organizations who see us see 10% or more of our network. So it's a very small fraction of the network, very small number of organizations out there that actually can have good visibility into our network. Which means if they were doing a study microscopically, counting the number of clients, counting the number of servers in our network, there's quite a few places where if they've placed a virtual monitor and are doing passive observation, they are not going to have a good count for our networks. So when you look into the data as to who actually sees us, it's very bipartite, meaning servers see our clients, this should be reversed. So servers see our clients, and clients see our servers, and not the reverse. So an external server does not see our servers well, an external client does not see our clients well. Remote popular servers see our clients. That's not a surprise. Things like Google have good visibility into our edge networks. So that's great. If you've got a great source, like something like Google, you have great visibility into our networks. But here, also, scanners, not a surprise, also see well into our network. So things like ChinaNet see well into 2 of our different edge networks. One of our edge networks actually filters probes. So it's great. Popularity has something to do with the visibility you would have into a client-heavy network. So popularity matters, and if you look at global popularity, we can measure that by Alexa rank. That's very easy, right? So if I have a source and I say this source is from a monitor that has popular hosted content in it, I can be fairly confident that it's going to see a fair number of clients. But that global popularity does not necessarily equal local popularity. And again, we've got this scanner thing where if you have a network that has popular content, you may not have those scanners that have visibility into these good networks. So we can start asking questions about if I had a source over here that has hosted really popular content, is that source better for visibility than, say, a source over here that we don't know what it has? It doesn't host very popular content, and it maybe has some scanners, maybe doesn't. What if I have two sources from places that don't host content? Do I want those two combined, or are they not as good as still the source that has this popular content in it? So we do this evaluation of combining sources, and we do this again, we're using Alexa as an indication of global popularity, and we take the Alexa top 1 million, and we break it down into groups, and we look at places that are hosting the top 100, places that are hosting top 100 to 1K, so on and so forth, and we break them down into groups. From these little groups of virtual monitors, we pull out combinations of them. So for example, I pull out 2 from the top 100, and I pull out 3 from the top 1K 100. I start combining these sources together, and then we can start asking questions about how these combinations and how this popular content play together, so we can answer questions about whether something that has popular content hosted is going to be a better source than someplace that's not hosting popular content. So I'll show you a graph, and this is again going to be the visibility of this group, this pulling that we pulled of these virtual monitors. So if it's only one single virtual monitor we pulled. This is the fraction of ground truth, the visibility they see into it. So up here is near 100% complete view of our networks. This is a logarithmic scale. So down here, this is very little visibility into our edge networks. So I'll just show you the two lines from the very top of the Alexa rank to the very bottom. So the purple is going to be places that host popular content, very popular, globally popular content, and the green line is going to be places that are on the bottom 1 million. Right? So this is not hosting globally popular content. And not a surprise, places that have popular content hosted have good visibility into our networks. It does make sense. You have universities, a lot of clients. This is hosting popular content. It makes sense eBay, Google would have good visibility. But there's diminishing returns here. So if I have 3 or 4 sources that have popular content that they're hosting, adding a 5th or a 6th or a 7th probably won't get me much better visibility. Same here, although we have to go a little further along the curve before we start getting diminishing returns for places that aren't hosting very popular content. Of course, we did 1,000 draws, which means these are the averages on these lines, and we have a range for each one of these categories. And if you can tell, there's a lot of variability here. And again, that's because global popularity does not equal local popularity. Just because something is globally very popular does not mean that some edge network has the same level of interest in that content. And here in the variability, there's a lot of variability down here because scanners can also up the visibility of places that aren't hosting popular content. So for a single source, if I had a choice between some place that's not hosting popular content and one that is, you would think intuitively that some place that's hosting popular content is always going to win over some place that doesn't, but that's not necessarily true. It's actually kind of a toss-up as to the visibility that you're seeing in whether it's popular or not. All right, so that's all results from this inverted analysis we did, where we're placing these virtual monitors and trying to understand what is seen and what is missed in our networks. We also do regular analysis where we figure out what we see of the rest of the world from all of our sources. And again, we've got active, we've got data from CDNs, and we've got these 3 universities that are passive. So we look at the rest of the world and we grab a random set of ASs and we categorize them manually based on whether they're server heavy or client heavy. If they're a mix, we don't use them. So the idea here is if you're a connectivity provider like T-Mobile, you're classified as a client-heavy organization. If you're Google, and you're hosting a lot of content, we classify you as server-heavy. And this allows us to see, again, this bipartite nature of traffic, where clients see servers and servers see clients, but the like does not see the like. We use ground truth as the joint visibility of all of our data sets. Active, our 2 sources from the CDN, and our 3 passive university data sets. All together, we comprise that and say this is ground truth, even though, again, like any sources, we're missing something. The point is here is to compare our sources in terms of what they see and figure out what each of them misses. So we can look at this and look at how well they see addresses out there in these client-heavy and these server-heavy organizations. So here on this side, we're going to have the server-heavy organizations, and this is the client-heavy organizations. And this is how well we can see into them. So this is the cumulative distribution of how many ISs we see and what fraction we see along the bottom here. So just to give you the intuition of the graphs, if you've got sort of a line that comes along here, that's not so great visibility. First of all, you're not seeing very many, and you're not seeing a whole big fraction of the ASs over here. If you've got along here, and you've got a nice big curve this direction, that's great visibility, because the majority of ASs you're getting great visibility into. So looking at these addresses, we can look at active probing is red, CDN logs, that's the blue, and a passive from one of our universities is yellow. So you'll notice here that the CDN and the university are about the same in terms of visibility into these server-heavy networks. And that's again because of this bipartite nature. The CDN is hosting content. It's not going to see well when it's looking for server IPs. Active is highly effective, of course, at finding servers. All right, client-heavy networks, the CDN and active perform about the same, and passive university that has mostly clients doesn't do as well. If we look at, say, finding /24s instead of looking at individual addresses, so if you're just looking to see if a network has activity at the /24 block level, it improves visibility because, of course, it's a lower bar to see whether a network is active versus an individual IP being active. So everybody's curves are moving down this way. But again, server-heavy, CDN and the university, this passive data, see about the same. Active does really well. And here for client-heavy, the CDN and the active do really pretty well. And the university is not so bad, even though it's only looking at 2/16s. So from this, we have some recommendations. So macroscopically, this is sort of work that's already been done in terms of what sources you would want to do these broad passes to know rough count of how many active IPs are on the internet. But here's this microscopic. So if you had a particular target, whether you're looking for a particular count in IPs or whether you're looking for just whether a network is active, you have different targets. And from that, we can recommend what is good for a source and what is bad for a source, and when you might want to use the combination of active and passive. So the point of this work is to understand biases and sources. And that's even for macroscopic work, that's important. And it's not that this isn't being discussed, but it'd be good to have this systematic point of view of trying to understand in the sources what the biases are before moving on for the macroscopic value. But it's especially important for microscopic. And again, being systematic about understanding those biases is important. So we have this inverted analysis, which we're hoping is a framework for people to understand the biases in their own sources. And again, I've shown that visibility is bipartite. What target you're going after matters in terms of how much visibility you have. Popular content matters, but it's not everything. So when somebody says they've got a great source from XYZ that's hosting massively popular content, they still should go into what systematic biases that may have and not just take for granted that that actually is going to see everything that they want it to see. I put down here our tech report. I'm sure you guys can all find the paper, but the tech report's got some extra stuff where we talk a little bit more in detail about what types of traffic actually help visibility, go into scanners a bit more, and also talk about capture recapture. So thank you for listening. If anyone's got any questions.
How did you select the virtual monitors?
Okay, first we're limited with the virtual monitors in terms of, if we go back a long way to the inverted analysis, we can't just put a virtual monitor anywhere we don't communicate with, right? So we are limited based on which our networks communicate to. So when we're looking at things like inverted analysis, we're placing virtual monitors everywhere that network talks to. And in our paper, I don't remember the numbers exactly, but we do break down on how much of the routable IP space we don't ever talk to, and so we don't have any data on how much they see. But we're limited by that. If you're talking about the reverse, when we're talking about what we're seeing in the rest of the world, we randomly pick 300 ASs to categorize. So the numbers, at an AS level 300.
Maybe it's safe to assume that the ASs or blocks where you don't see any traffic, they don't see you at all, I presume.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, so
yes.
they see zero of you.
Right.
Your nice graphs with as you increase the number of vantage points on virtual monitors, I guess that's really telling you it's telling you something similar to mark and recapture, where it's telling you that it'll tell you when to stop, or it's giving you an indication of when to stop.
Right. Capture recapture will tell you somewhat of where to stop, but they don't tell you you have to be careful with capture recapture that you don't pick sources that are actually going to be biased towards seeing the same things already.
Yes.
So that, this doesn't have quite the same part, so both, I think, in combination, and our tech report does go into that. Yeah.
So for your inverted analysis, how did you do the mapping between the Alexa top 1 million websites and the network that you were actually talking about?
Yeah, it's a bit of a manual process again. So we rank the organization based on whatever its most popular server was on the Alexa rank. So we take the Alexa rank, map it to what AS it's in, and if we communicate with that AS, and we do a lot of manual, looking at web pages, trying to figure out, what's where and what AS, and so on and so forth.
What was the motivation for this problem?
I mean, there was several. I mean, for me, there's initial work that I had done, active versus passive sort of understanding. It wasn't that any of the results were particularly surprising in that work, but that nobody had quantified something, and I know John Heinemann wants to talk.
So can I add to that? So I think another motivation is there have been a number of prominent papers based on huge data sets, like Google. We looked at all of Google's TCP and we found this. And that's exciting, and that's a huge data set, and good for you. But I think a takeaway is even if you have Google, you don't have TCP connections with the millions of servers in the world. If you have Google client traces. And so I think we have to take caution, even with vast data sets, if they're sort of monocultures. I mean, it was surprising how well Google does percentage-wise of what they see of USC. But if you look a little careful, they don't see, we don't have data from Google, but the CDN that we use does not see servers at USC. So conclusions using vast CDN data are still limited in what they can say about the whole internet, and vice versa.
I see. So the assumptions that people make when they make simulations of that.
The assumptions with bulk data sources need to be carefully stated. And I'm not saying those are wrong, I'm just saying we need to be careful.
I was going to understate that, so I'm glad you talked.
Thank you.
What about spoofed IP addresses?
Yes, so again, passive is going to be limited by that, and for our work, we statistically remove the spoofing.
How can you remove the spoofing?
So statistically, I mean, let's go to details, but it's, I'd actually have to review a few things. It's the same as they had done in capture recapture, where they statistically remove spoofing. And I can get back to you with more details.
Another question is when you have displayed the performance of the active address scanning, it's quite it's very high. So which addresses are missed by?
So it's very, very high for servers, but it's not actually all that. I mean, it's equivalent to a CDN for clients, which is interesting that clients are responding to active probes as often, but servers are more likely to respond to probes than clients. So it's again, it's this trade-off as to what you have access to and whether it makes sense for the target that you're looking at.
you have any statistical model that would make possible to decide where probes should be located? If you have a limited budget, a limited number of probes, for example, that you can locate, some of visibility on some part of the address space and others on other parts with a lot of overlapping, how would you share
So is the
that
purpose,
budget?
I mean, I know there's been work done for the purpose of knowing outages on the network for that, budgeting how many probes you put out there, but if you're talking about probes in terms of understanding liveness, that's a little tougher, but there is some thought. I know Elena's thought some about that. I don't know if John has any comment.
Sorry, I missed the question.
Can you strategically place probes? I mean, if you only have so many probes you can send out, is there ways to be strategic about it to
For
get better?
active program? I don't know, I've never thought, it's so easy to send active
And
program.
imagine that you have a limited budget and you want to switch on some probes. Which one do you select? Okay.
I mean, this paper is not so much about the active probing side, it compares to that. I think this paper says more about the passive side, which is, you know, if you could get 2 universities, you're gonna see a lot more than if you get 3 universities and so on. And the answer is, yeah, sort of, but not as much as you might like, there's a lot of overlap.